The father of the victim taking the stand, no cross-examination there. Donald Sniederman talking about his son who was gunned down in the parking lot of his own child's daycare center. Joining me now to talk about this testimony, Carrie Hacket, an attorney, defense attorney. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's always difficult to watch and listen to family, of course, because it's the direct connection to why you're in the courtroom in the first place. But he had some very interesting things to bring out that are very pertinent to the case beyond just coloring who the victim was. And that is the phone call that he says he received from his daughter-in-law, in which she reveals that his son has been shot. Why is that so significant here?
Well, it's significant in this case because so far from the testimony we've heard, Andrea should not have known that he'd been shot at this point. She had heard from Dunwoody Prep that there had been an accident of some kind. And from the testimony we've heard, we don't know that she would know that he's been shot. So we can only assume or conjecture at this point that perhaps she either knew that the shooting would occur before it did occur, or she had played some part in the shooting.
Okay, and this is the second person we've heard so far testify to the same sort of series of events. In other words, that Andrea calls them up and says her husband's been shot, even though Andrea has testified and said that, no, she didn't know anything about that.
Absolutely, that's correct. Andrea's friend Shayna Citron also testified that Andrea called her and told her that her husband had been shot. So it is suspicious. I think the jury will consider this testimony and consider whether Andrea knew about a shooting prior to the shooting occurring.
You know, this is clearly a very emotional time. You get this phone call, someone tells you this, a terrible event has happened. And then there is, of course, all the follow-up. This case was very much in the media. I'm wondering, is it possible that both Shayna and the father here may have misheard? In other words, that Andrea didn't say shot. She just said something terrible had happened, but their recollection now after the fact is she said shot.
It is possible, but there was so many documents produced in this case, so their phone records were scrutinized. They know exactly when she called them. They took steps to follow up to determine what happened to Rusty after she said that he had been shot. So, for example, Rusty's dad called Dunwoody Prep and said, can you confirm, has he been shot? What happened? And they did confirm that he had been shot. I don't think he would have taken those subsequent steps if Andrea just said, oh, my husband's been in an accident, I'm heading over there.
Right, that makes sense. I want to play for you some sound we have here from Esther Panich. She is the attorney that represents Hemy Neuman's wife. And she had some very revealing things to say about her client. Listen.
I will say that when she heard about the murder of Rusty Sniederman, there was a part of her that wanted to go to the Shiva at the Sniederman's home and reach out to Rusty's parents and let him know that the woman who you believe is your beloved daughter-in-law was having an affair with my husband. She thought better of it and decided that that would not be an appropriate route to go. She knew that the Sniedermans must have been suffering terribly. To lose a child is the worst thing that can happen to someone, and so she didn't.
Clearly, of course, that would not have been the appropriate time, but the information she has, the sort of dark side she can reveal about their daughter-in-law was huge.
That's right, and I think that for the exact reason that Hemy Neuman's wife didn't go to that Shiva, the defense attorneys in this case are not going to cross Mr. Sniederman. Mr. Sniederman has been a victim in this case. His son has died. There is this implication that there was an affair between Andrea and Mr. Neuman. And the defense team in this case is doing a very good job of holding back and of not crossing Mr. Sniederman, who is really testifying here just for the purpose of showing that the motive could be financial.
Right, and we did bring up the money. He talks about what the value, the net worth of his son was, and since he did his taxes, he would know it well, and said it was $1.1 million. So we're talking about a family that did have money here. It's not like, say, an average household.
That's right. The prosecution here is trying to show that Hemy Neuman wanted the life and the financial resources that the Sniedermans had. So they did have some wealth, over $1 million, and they're trying to show that he was motivated in part by financial reasons and by wanting to have his financial life.
Attorney Carrie Hacket, thank you very much for joining us, and we greatly appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the day. Joining me now to discuss De Silva's testimony is criminal defense attorney Carrie Hacket. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So the implication, I guess, by this is that Neuman's trying to cover his tracks when he calls up the man to whom he bought the gun and says, hey, I got rid of it. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know why Hemy Neuman would have talked to Jan De Silva. It doesn't seem like a person that's being investigated or could possibly be investigated for a crime would make such a move, or that it would be wise. But apparently he did tell Mr. De Silva that he got rid of the gun and that something terrible had happened with the gun. It's pretty damning testimony.
It is. And in fact, you know what? Let's play a clip so we can remind everyone exactly how it was said, and this is it.
Basically, he told me that something bad happened with the gun. I thought like if it malfunctioned or something. He just told me he got rid of it. I asked him if he sold it or anything. He told me no. He just touched it on the Lake Lanier, and that it was okay because he made sure that it was touched in somewhere where nobody can find it.
All right. So, who does that testimony help? Does it help the defense? That him says, all right, the guy's clearly crazy. He called up and told the guy he got something bad happen with a gun. Or is it a man trying to cover his tracks, as the prosecution would say?
Well, I think that the prosecution is using this witness to show that, in fact, Hemy Neuman did murder Rusty Sniederman. So it goes a long way to proving that point. But I think for the defense, it shows essentially that Hemy Neuman was in a position and in a place where he maybe was a little crazy or did have a mood disorder. I don't know if that gets us to a point where he is legally insane, but certainly that's what the defense is going to try to argue from this testimony.
Well, we already know that Hemy Neuman had admitted he did the shooting, so that really wasn't the point. It's the state of mind, as you bring up. And you know, you look at Hemy Neuman in court, as we do every day. He looks very composed. He looks almost professorial. He doesn't look, you know, in a way that I guess makes me think he is insane. How does the defense argue that?
He does, but the defense argument here is not that he is constantly and continuously in a state of insanity. It's that for that split second when the trigger was pulled, that he didn't know right from wrong. And they're saying that a totality of the circumstances caused this mental condition, that it was the manipulation of Andrea Sniederman building up over some very long period of time, combined with his bipolar disorder, that caused this moment of mental insanity.
All right, well, this phone conversation with Mr. De Silva between Hemy Neuman reveals even more. That comes up in this other sound that we have, and it goes to the issue of a mistress. Take a listen.
He just told me, don't ever have a mistress. And then he then again told me, I just have, because of it, I have a problem with my family. And he never again actually said anything about a mistress. He just told me that the family knew he had a gun, and there was like altercation, and that the gun was flashed or was seen by the members of the family, and they just all got scared, and he just basically needed to get rid of the gun as soon as possible.
You know, I just can't believe so much incriminating information seems to come out of one simple phone call. You have, you know, first and foremost, something bad happened with a gun, and then the follow-up is, oh, and a mistress, that word gets mentioned, which also suggests clandestine. So what I'm wondering here, again, who does that help in this particular case when he comes out and sort of implies, oh, don't have a mistress?
Well, don't have a mistress could be playing into the defense's argument here that it was this mistress, this particular person, Andrea Sniederman, that caused Hemy Neuman to get so worked up and so mentally disturbed that he got to a point where he didn't know wrong from right. So I think in this case, the defense is going to use that in their favor, in their advantage.
So that, in other words, that this is a man that was driven out of his devotion to this woman to carry out the act that he did.
Exactly. And in retrospect, he may have realized that it was wrong, but at the time he pulled that trigger, his mistress was the reason that he was suffering under a mental disease or defect.
Well, and that's the problem I have. I mean, okay, he has this strong, bizarre devotion to this woman. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he is insane. And that's the conflict that I think the defense seems to have here, is that they're trying to paint a man, one who's manipulated, but manipulation doesn't necessarily mean you are crazy.
No, I think the defense is going to try to show that Hemy Neuman had a history over the course of his life of manic and depressive episodes, that he had spent away all of his money in a very short period of time, and that it was his personality type that is the reason that this manipulation of Andrea Sniederman caused him to have this momentary lapse of judgment and insanity, they're going to argue.
All right, and quickly I want to touch upon just that whole thing where they were talking with the rent-a-car person. Apparently he stands out in her mind, I'm talking about Mr. Neuman, because he was in some way intimidating or seemed like a jerk, I guess is the term I might use. How does that imply that he's mentally unstable?
Well, I think it's a long shot on this one, but the defense is trying to show that his fidgeting and uneasiness was enough to make the rental person uneasy, and that in fact could be a sign that he was about to go off into this mental insanity and was getting close to a point where he didn't know right from wrong.
Or he could be just a jerk.
Could be.
I mean, it seems like a stretch to make that you're witnessing a man in the early stages of some kind of breakdown.
It is a stretch, but the defense team here has to take the testimony that they're given and try to elicit testimony that's going to ultimately help them piece together a case, and in the end of the trial, at the closing, be able to take bits and pieces from the testimony of each witness to show that, yes, in fact, Hemy Neuman was insane at the time he pulled the trigger.
And that's why we rely on your expertise, Carrie Hacket, defense attorney. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.